But I want to start with one of my favorite people and the finest Surgeon General of any state in the union, Dr. Joseph Ladapo from Florida. Kind of blockbuster news today, and I want to make sure this audience gets it first. Dr. Ladapo, you're kind of a revered figure among MAGA and Republicans, and I know everybody down in Florida. You've done such a great job there, even people that oppose maybe politically you and Governor DeSantis. But tell us what did you say today about what you're going to do as Surgeon General in Florida about vaccines that have mRNA in it?
Yeah, thanks, Bannon. Well, we've called for a halt to the use of these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. And the reasoning is simple. You don't have to have majored in biology or biochemistry. These vaccines have DNA in them. Everyone knows what DNA is. They're contaminated with DNA, and that's not necessarily a big deal. But it's a problem with these vaccines because the DNA hangs on with the mRNA and goes into people's cells. So this is a completely different risk analysis than other products that have had DNA. And the FDA knows this, and they have actually specifically told pharmaceutical manufacturers that they should check to make sure the DNA that's coming in is not integrating, is not screwing up our human DNA. You know, a concern that some people intuitively raised early. And the FDA at this point has not provided a drop of evidence that this simple test for integration into the human genome has been performed. And that's crazy. So we called for a halt of the use of these products.
Doctor, help me out here for a second. When we've had other experts on or other people on from other streaming services or podcasts, whatever, the mainstream media immediately, you know, the Mediaites of the world, the Media Matters, it's all of a sudden, you know, we're conspiracy theory guys, we're kooks that we're talking about, you know, keeping people away from this tremendous vaccine that saves so many lives. What evidence do you point to? Because I know you're a man of science. That's where you came and took the Surgeon General's. I think you were at UCLA after Harvard. You came and took the Surgeon General job under Governor DeSantis because you actually wanted to get this out into the field. What evidence do you point to that backs up your contention?
Yeah. Well, the great news here is the evidence has been completely provided by the FDA. So it's their evidence. And the evidence is a combination of their guidance documents in the past that acknowledge the risk of DNA integration and the need to test for it to make sure you're not fouling up the human genome. Their evidence is their acknowledgement that there is DNA in there, and that's been found to be billions of particles, small particles of DNA with each dose in at least one study. And they've acknowledged, because we asked them specifically whether they have tested for this. And they gave a non-answer. They talked about a bunch of other things, and they never answered the question, which I infer to mean that they haven't tested for it. So it's literally all their evidence. And I'm not saying, frankly, I think it probably does have some integration at some levels with the human genome, because these vaccines are honestly, they're the antichrist of all products. So I think it probably does. But I'm not saying it does. I'm saying that they themselves have said you should test for it. And it hasn't happened. And they've provided no proof that it's happened. And that's so wrong. You know, it's just complete disrespect to the human genome and the importance of protecting it and preserving it. And that is our connection to God.
Doctor, you're the Surgeon General of the great free state of Florida. We have 49 other states. We have territories, Puerto Rico, Guam. We have other territories. Isn't this something that should be done at the federal level? Isn't this something that the FDA should come out? I mean, why is it a Surgeon General of even one of our biggest and greatest and most prosperous states? Why is it incumbent upon you to do this? So what happens to the other people in the other 49 states and the territories?
You know, this is the looking glass. I mean, you have to remember, we actually have a vaccine now that multiple studies that the federal government is pushing, that multiple studies from different countries around the world have found that the people who take it become eventually at increased risk of contracting the disease that they took it against. This has been a finding, multiple studies, great journals. Not a word of this from the CDC and the FDA. We are living in an alternate dimension in terms of these COVID-19 vaccines and the relationship to reality that the CDC and the FDA have taken. And yeah, I pinch myself too, and other people do too. How can, it's one thing after the other, the changes in the menstrual cycles, the strokes, the myocarditis, the other cardiac issues. It's just one thing after the other with these vaccines, and it just does not matter to the CDC and the FDA. And of course, they work with other governments in terms of their analogous organizations, and everyone's just decided that they're going to run one big lie and just say, no, I don't see it, to anything that they don't like to see. So I agree, Steve. It's crazy. It's completely nuts. But, fortunately, I'm certainly not going to change. And I came here to Florida with my family because there's a governor here, Governor DeSantis, who is willing to stick with whatever the truth is, however uncomfortable it gets. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. These should not be used absolutely shouldn't be used anymore.
So you and Governor DeSantis are in sync on this. Now, does this mean that, what does it technically mean in Florida? Are you going to stop and ban the use of these vaccines? Are you going to tell state-run facilities, schools, which has been so controversial? What technically happens with your, I guess, proclamation?
Yeah, we're working on that. We're going to do everything that we possibly can. And, certainly with our county health departments, we should not be offering them. I mean, it's literally immoral to be offering these products. And we're going to explore what else we can do, because frankly, it's so wrong for people to be, whether it's CVS or Walgreens or some other drugstore or hospital. I mean, it's very wrong for people to be putting this in human beings when the proper testing hasn't been done to confirm that there's no integration of the DNA and the lipid nanoparticles into the human genome. It's just, my kids can probably understand this, and my oldest is 10. It's WRONG wrong.
Dr. Fauci does 2 days of closed-door, under-oath depositions next week on the 8th and the 9th. What do you want Congress? We do control, obviously one of the most important branches, the House of Representatives. What would you like to see the House actually do to either stop this or get involved in this?
I think two things. Dr. Fauci is the most slippery scientist who has ever worked in the federal government, probably. And unfortunately, because he has a scientific background that most people, members of Congress, don't have, he's able to slither his way around their questions. So I would say two things. First of all, they need some more expertise up there in terms of medical expertise and scientific expertise. And second of all, he obviously misled the country in order to preserve his reputation and the reputation of NIH and everyone else who was involved with funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan. That's just totally obvious. So they need to pin him down in a way that, that he can't slither out of.
Hey, Doc, can you hang on? I just want to hold you through the break, a short commercial break, and come back. I got a couple other questions. Monumental news out of the state of Florida today by the Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, about the mRNA vaccines. We're going to go to the border. We're going to finish with Dr. Ladapo. We're going to go to the border. We've got Alex DeGracia talk about redistricting maps, the fight that you're winning. We got a lot going on today. Fights we're winning, and maybe fights we're not quite winning yet. You ready for a fight? You're in the war room. Man the ramparts. Back in a moment. Ladapo, what do you think to the House? You are someone people look to for judgment and discernment. Clearly, you would not have issued this, which is kind of shocked. The reverberation of this is just starting in the pharmaceutical industry and, how it's implemented. And you're calling the FDA out for essentially being liars. So this has enormous implications and urgency. What would you like to see the House? We do control the funding. I know the Speaker of the House has a hard time understanding this, but we do control the funding for these organizations. What are you calling upon, since it's obviously an emergency, or you wouldn't have issued this? What would you like to see the House do about the relationship with CDC, FDA, and others that actually have the executive responsibility to do this?
Honestly, Bannon, it's a very tough and tall task for the House because what we've seen over the last few years is scientists who have more expertise, dance their way around and convince people that 3-year-olds should wear something on their face, and except for when they're sleeping next to each other in preschool, and other completely silly and ridiculous things, and say it with a straight face. So I think they really need to bring in individuals with scientific expertise, Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Harvey Risch. There are others who are bona fide researchers with the background, with the expertise. And I think you kind of need a sort of a committee-like discussion so that when Dr. Fauci bobs and weaves, or when Dr. Califf bobs and weaves in terms of answering questions relative to the FDA, those questions, those responses can be parsed out, because they have been totally dishonest. I mean, you said lies. It's even worse than that, because I don't even know who they're serving with the things that they've been saying. They're not serving us. I guess they're serving pharma, but frankly, I think it's worse than that. So I really think you just need to have the right people in the room, and the Congress folks who didn't go to medical school, or didn't work in labs for years, they're going to get, unfortunately, circles run around them. I am sad to say that, but honestly, I think that's what's going to happen.
We just don't have. No, we don't have the professional training. Would you volunteer if it could be worked out? Would you volunteer actually to sit in and be one of the people to review it and ask questions of Fauci when he's under oath next Monday and Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, I would, but frankly, there are people who, I have my job here in Florida. There are people who know even more in terms of the details of these misdeeds that he almost certainly. I mean, he is certainly committed them. It's just a matter of putting the evidence together to make it just so compelling that even he can't weasel his way out of it. So I certainly would be happy to help, and the country will be better off for it. The world will be better off for it. This has been just the worst assault on human everything in my lifetime, for sure.
So you do recommend Dr. McCullough, Dr. Malone, and Dr. Harvey Risch of Yale. Those would be three pretty good starters we could put in there.
Absolutely, and there are others too who are very strong scientifically, but you need people like that in the room, because I mean, you are not going to get Dr. Fauci if you do not have sufficient expertise and knowledge of these. I mean, clearly moved to cover up the connection between research his institute had funded at NIH and this virus from the Wuhan lab, from that Wuhan area. So you need very good scientists who are not going to let him get away with all the things he's been getting away with.
Dr. Ladapo, how do we get your book about the story of your life is incredible. How do we find your writings? People want to follow this closely, so where do they go?
Thanks, Bannon. They can get Transcend Fear. They can find it on Amazon, all the major the book sites. And honestly, if it weren't for what I describe in that book, the journey I've had spiritually, emotionally, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I wouldn't be able to live in truth, irrespective of the noise and the consequences. And so, I encourage people to check it out, and encourage people to follow their own journeys.
Dr. Ladapo, I can guarantee you one thing. The mainstream media and the official apparatus of Biopharma are going to be coming at you like they always come at you hard. They're going to be coming at you like no other right now, since you've really called them out about this vaccine. So honored to have you on here, and look forward to having you back.
Thanks, man. I want to point to the FDA's own words when they do. Unfortunately, they hung themselves.
Amen. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Dr. Joseph Ladapo, the Surgeon General of Florida and the Chief Medical advisor to Governor Ron DeSantis.